Hey everyone, today I'll be responding to an artifact of genocide apologetics, which has become all too common in the public square today concerning Palestine. One of the most popular arguments floating around right now generally goes something like this. Take a look.
Anyone who uses the term genocide in this context simply doesn't know what they're talking about or is a malevolent actor. I don't know if Mr. Uyghur's traveled at all in his life, how far he's traveled, how many conflicts he's seen, but I'd have guessed none. And you clearly know nothing about this particular conflict, and you've obviously seen none of it. The genocide that you describe is such a smear and a libel against the Jewish state. If Israel wanted to commit genocide, I'm sure it could, but it doesn't. It doesn't remotely want to. And people like you and other pro-Palestinian propagandists have spent years claiming that Israel is committing genocide in the Gaza. By the way, the weirdest thing about this claim is that the population of the Gaza has grown by 1 million in the last 15 or so years. So if Israel was trying to carry out a genocide, it's either the worst perpetrator of genocide ever or uniquely poor at performing that task. None of the stats support that ridiculous claim. It's such a weird smear and a libel of Israel. I mean, most genocides involve an attempt to eradicate a race of people, and the population of Gaza has boomed in the last 18 years. So if you say there has been a genocide, either you've got to say there has been an attempted genocide and the Jews are no good at committing genocide, that there are would-be genocidists, but they're just really bad at the job. Or, more likely, you're trying to wound the Jews. And that's all that's happening. Notice that all of the accusations against Israel, all the most vicious accusations, involve attempts to draw a parallel between the behavior of the Israelis and the behavior of Nazi Germany. Genocide, concentration camp, ghetto, like the Warsaw Ghetto, like the concentration camps, etc., etc.
How thoroughly psychotic and foolish does one need to be to find what you just heard rational or humane? The first things out of Murray's mouth are that whoever invokes the word genocide either doesn't know what they're talking about or is a malevolent actor. Then in literally the next breath, he calls this a smear and a libel against who specifically? Against what anyone with a capacity to speak English understands as ethnostatism, the very concept of Israel being defined as a Jewish homeland, that is, a homeland for Jews whose birthright it is to ethnically cleanse an indigenous population in the Levant, is implicitly genocidal. The conflation of Israel with Jewry is, moreover, perfectly antithetical to its pretensions of being open, democratic, pluralistic, multicultural. The charge of genocide is not a libel against Jews, who in point of fact deplore this monstrosity in their international majority. Murray calls it a smear against Israel, but what precisely was so depraved and morally insolvent about the Nazi program but for its goal of producing a homogeneous, Aryan, white, Christian Germany, trimmed and purged of Jews, Poles, blacks, Roma, and Russians? What precisely motivated Germany's murderous enterprise outside the widespread paranoia of their innumerable replacement theories? Nothing. It's not a trivial component of what was so sinister about Hitlerism. It was the sine qua non, the most integral dimension of it. The parallel to Germany is no convenient or hackneyed analog, intended to wound Jews. It's not low-hanging fruit. Zionism is of the exact same venomous yield that grew and withered on the Nazi vine. These things are not alike. They're synonymous. They're definitional. They both belong in the dictionary under ethnostatism. Or, if we define a Jewish homeland as being a home for adherents of Judaism, that's called theocracy, and it's no better. But, so long as we're defining words, what is genocide? Clearly, if we take it only to mean the annihilation of a group in their numerical whole or their majority, which is Murray's understanding, then he's absolutely right about not knowing what the hell he's talking about or being a malevolent actor, or both. Because that's not what genocide means, you fucking dolt. Genocide is about intent and methodology. Now I'm going to read the most authoritative criterion that exists for genocide. This comes straight from the UN. Now listen to this. This is from the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide under Elements of the Crime. It says this, and I quote, "The Genocide Convention establishes in Article 1 that the crime of genocide may take place in the context of an armed conflict, international or non-international, but also in the context of a peaceful situation. The latter is less common, but still possible. Article 2 of the Genocide Convention contains a narrow definition of the crime of genocide, which includes two main elements. One, a mental element, that is, the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such, and two, a physical element, which includes the following 5 acts enumerated exhaustively. And they are killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, and finally, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group." End quote. Now, just because Israel must balance its competing impulses to displace and eliminate Palestinians against the very real-world challenges of appearing not to do so, that is, managing the PR, the narrative, the optics, so as not to suffer the inevitable ignominy and pariahdom they've rightly earned, is totally irrelevant to their murderous intent. In point of fact, the periodic recovery of Palestine's population from Israel's repeated assault and bloodletting speaks far more to the resilience of Palestinians in the face of the most vicious regime and impossible odds. So to Murray's point, it's not that Israel is bad at genocide, so much as the Palestinian spirit is greater than Israel's ability to hide its horrific fucking crimes and escape the consequences. Moreover, if genocide had anything to do with the population of a target group, then how does Douglas Murray turn around and say Israel is being genocided by Hamas? It's such a stupid argument. The most conservative estimates of the latest death toll stands at over 35,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza, including more than 15,000 children. Over 10,000 are missing. More than 80,000 have been injured. And these are just the numbers the media will recognize. These stats are demonstrably underreported and nowhere remotely close to the reality. But even those numbers are terrifically incriminating. That's to say nothing of Israel's killing spree in the West Bank. I'm going to address the living conditions when I come to the concentration camp claim in a moment, but let's talk about preventing births. The so-called only democracy in the Middle East practices open segregation, anti-miscegenation, and sterilization on its own Arab civilians, and even Ethiopians actually, not to mention in the occupied territories. The concentration camp conditions I'll come to in a minute also satisfies the measures imposed to prevent births. And as for the forcible transfer of children, Israel routinely raids Gaza and the West Bank, abducting children, holding them hostage without charge and administrative detention, torturing them, denying them habeas corpus, convicting the lucky few before kangaroo military courts, and, worst of all, displaces Palestinians daily from their homes during their expansion of settlements in the West Bank, conducting brutal raids on mere refugee camps intended to permanently separate children from their parents. Israel is the only state in the world, that systematically prosecutes between 500 and 700 Palestinian children annually in military courts, lacking basic rights to fair trial. The list is bloody endless. Okay, now let's switch gears here for a second and define what a concentration camp is. A concentration camp, according to dictionary.com, is a guarded compound for the mass detention without hearings or the imprisonment without trial of civilians as refugees, members of ethnic minorities, political opponents, etc., etc., unquote. From the very moment Hamas took control of Gaza in 2007, they have been under total and complete siege. There is an official land, aerial, and naval blockade. No thing and no body enters Gaza without Israel's express consent. No thing and no body leaves Gaza without the same. They are put on calorie-restricted diets calculated to keep Gaza's 2.5 million people just above starvation. They have no autonomy to speak of. They're not permitted to participate in world trade. And yes, this even applies to the Rafah-Egypt border. Israel occupies Gaza from all directions. The population density is among the worst in the world, rivaling that of Tokyo, with civilian infrastructure that has been all but totally obliterated since the psychotic operations Israel performed between the years 2008 and 2014. These are the basic elementary facts, and this was all prior to October 7th too, by the way, so things are much more dire now. And I'm simply clearing my throat here. I could spend hours detailing every last indignity imposed upon Gazans. But just based on what I've briefly laid out here, what precisely fails to meet the definition of a concentration camp, Douglas, and the third item of genocide? That is, just to reiterate, inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. If that isn't a concentration camp, nothing is. If it ain't genocide, nothing is genocide. It's a meaningless notion. In fact, Douglas Murray's moronic, hateful, venomous, bad faith argument would be like someone saying the word genocide didn't even exist as a concept prior to Raphael Lemnick's scholarship and its codification into international law until 1947. Ergo, the Jews didn't suffer a genocide because the word didn't even exist yet. What the hell would you think of me if I said such a disgraceful denialist thing? Let Gazans and Israelis switch places with one another for a day and tell me this is not a concentration camp or an active genocide. How immortal the words of Frederick Douglass that when men oppress their fellow men, the oppressor ever finds in the character of the oppressed a full justification for his oppression. Or like that Southern gospel that runs, I have so many things I can't even touch, so many places I can't even go. I have liberty in parentheses of iron. Now, there are no shortage of issues with Hamas. I share all of them. But the idea that Palestinians should just embrace their chains, it's pure masochism and capitulation. You would rise up. Anyone would rise under such dehumanizing treatment. Palestinians are nothing short of inspiring, awesome, mythical, monumental paragons of resilience, fortitude, class, and humanity. Try as Murray will to dehumanize them, they're greater than this pathetic fascist piece of shit. Okay, and now I arrive at the crescendo of my rebuttal, and it's this, so listen up. I keep asking myself, how the hell have things come to this? When did it become okay to say such nakedly genocidal, racist, despicable things without consequence? I'll tell you exactly how we arrived here. Our culture has weaponized the idea of free speech, which is about what forms of expression the state guarantees it will not interfere, with the obviously distorted notion that people are somehow entitled to their platform and that you can just say whatever the hell you want. This is complete rubbish, and Douglas Murray peddles in this free speech confusion, obfuscation, or misdirection all the time. In the United States, you may be able to say some pretty wrong-headed and hateful things without fear of the government coming after you. But let's get real here. If someone were to go around saying things like, we owe Hitler an apology, or Hitler had the right idea, or the Holocaust was a forgery, or calling a black person that infamous word, which has been used for centuries to keep them under, the individual who does such things better be prepared to pay a pretty dear and expensive social price. Wouldn't you agree? No one can go around in white robes or bearing the swastika without the expectation of having serious consequences. Good grief. Without the real threat of putting their job, platform, or reputation in peril. Yet, it's become so normalized to speak of Palestinians like this, and it's because we give airtime to fools like Douglas Murray, Ben Shapiro, and so many, many others. And it's not just Palestinians or Arabs that they do it to. They do it to innumerable other marginalized groups. And this is precisely why there are so many otherwise decent people walking around thinking that the savagery targeted at Palestinians is perfectly okay, or justified in the name of war, or fighting terror, or living in the denial that our governments are supplying and financing a full-blown genocide. Now sure, I'm not saying you take this posture with everyone or just anybody, because some people do unwittingly pass this nonsense on. That's the issue. I have friends myself who've raised this objection because they tune into fuckheads like Douglas Murray. So yeah, I get it. You don't just blast anyone who spreads this, but we should take this position to the source of such bile. We should against the most public purveyors of this hate. How would you respond to someone, just hypothetically, who came up to you with Hitler's Mein Kampf in hand, saying, they found this book that makes a lot of sense. You should really read it and learn from it. And no, I'm not talking about reading it for historical or academic purposes. How should we respond to such people? I'll tell you how. You should shout them the fuck down. Call them a fucking moron and tell them to get the hell out of your sight. Or what if they approach a group and spread this bile? What should you say? You should go up to the Nazi, dominate him, shout at him, tell him he's a hateful little worm, and that you will not allow his would-be victims to feel unsafe in his presence. That's how we should handle these pricks. So here's my call to action for you. Go online and call Douglas Murray the fucking fascist that he is, but tell him why he's not right in the head. Go onto his socials, unfollow him, block him, and you know what? You don't stop there either. You go on to Piers Morgan's socials too. Call his network. Call the show and network of anyone who welcomes such a guest. And you scream at them. Ask them, why in the hell are you openly platforming the views of these fuckwits who clearly have nothing of value to add to this discussion? Social cancellation has absolutely nothing to do with free speech. It can't just be okay when Dr. Phil on national television interviews and gives the rhetorical equivalent of a rim job to Benjamin Netanyahu, today's most despicable, bloodthirsty war criminal. It cannot be tolerated. This is not the kind of world we should accept for ourselves and others. Now note, I'm not endorsing violence, and it doesn't qualify as abusive speech or harassment even, because they're the ones inciting violence and genocide. This is completely different from the Punch a Nazi movement, which obviously goes too far. But that's how we clean up our public discourse. We expect no less when it comes to defending Jews or African Americans or any other group of people who has been targeted. And rightly so. In fact, you know what? We should respond the way we react to the dehumanization of Ukrainians, like when Volodymyr Zelensky visited Canada and Parliament unwittingly paid a standing ovation to the former Nazi militant in World War II, Mr. Hunka, I think was his name. The public condemnation was decisive and immediate, and the House Speaker resigned the very next day. Or like when dozens of UN diplomats walked out of the chamber in 2022 when Sergei Lavrov defended Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's how we treat fascists. I once read a book on the Holocaust called None is Too Many by Irving Abella and Harold Troper. So in closing, I'd like to share it with you. Now it says this, and I quote, "This unwillingness to speak of anti-Semitism, bearing in mind for modern application, Palestinians are Semites. This unwillingness to speak of anti-Semitism also stems from an attitude of political denial. For the men to admit that their behavior had an explicitly political and ideological dimension, and that the Nazi moral philosophy seemed reasonable to them at the time, means admitting that they were simply political whirligigs, turning docilely with the wind at every change of regime. And that is a truth few among them can or will confront," unquote. Well, I will not be a passive whirligig in the presence of genocidal airheads and gas bags. Nor should you. So speak the hell up. Hey everyone, I hope you liked this video. If you want more like the one you just watched, click the suggested video on this screen. Make sure you subscribe, and to connect with me on my other platforms, my handles are linked below in the description, alright? Take care, peeps. Till next time.